Good evening, everyone. This evening, we're going to be discussing Parashat Teitzei. The Parasha itself, of course, follows the organizational institutions that the Torah set down in Parashat Shoftim. That would be, of course, the judicial system, the legislative system, which began on Har Sinai, was also given the impetus to continue throughout the Jewish world, Jewish history, Jewish life. And of course, we then now are going to talk, we have the Melech, we of course have the Melech, who becomes the persona and the face of the Jewish people. He has judicial opportunities, but of course, he has limitations, Melech, as we learned in last week's Parsha, that he was limited in the number of horses that he could have, not to return to Mitzrayim. He was limited in the number of wives that he could have, and limited to the material wealth that he possessed, whether that was silver or gold. And of course, each of those elements, he's the only Jew that is limited. There are no limitations on these things, in theory, for any other Jew except the Melech. And of course, that would be to make sure that he does not abuse the power and the position that he has. I think also that each of these three elements that are limited to him are representative of those aspects of society that a person who is in a political position can abuse. When we talk about material wealth, of course, they are subject, people who are in positions of political authority certainly can use it to enrich themselves materially. Unfortunately, we have seen in America and other places as well that people in positions of political authority then use it to fulfill whatever sexual advantages they want. And the third is that the horses represent power. So power and sex and material wealth are the three areas that can corrupt a person who is not honest or have integrity. But now we're going to move this Parsha of Teitzei, into a different realm. Now that we have a society and an organizational structure as to how the society should exist, we now find that that societies, unfortunately, from time to time engage in war more often than any of us would like. And so the Torah at the very beginning of this parsha deals with the corruption of the individual soldiers who are involved in battle and who then can take advantage of the women of the enemy. And of course, we know even until this very day, we do have these reports that come out of Ukraine and Russia. It doesn't matter whether they're credible or not, individual ones, but we know they could be. It's not out of the realm of human behavior to abuse and to turn the most inhumane of human enterprise, namely war, to turn it into a matter of personal satisfaction of their desires and lust. And of course, the Parsha itself also ends with the issue of war and Amalek. So we know that war is a fact of life for societies. Now, the Torah here wishes to tell us about how people need to act on the battlefield. Before we engage in that particular discussion, I'd like to say this week's shir will really focus on the intersection between Shat and Drash. A lot of people have difficulty to determine what is Shat. if you ask some people, they'll say, well, pshat is the simple meaning. Well, not necessarily. Not necessarily the simple meaning or the literal meaning of the psukim. Certainly, that certainly is not drash. So we're going to talk about the intersection of pshat and drash, and we're going to define pshat as that which conforms, an interpretation which best conforms to the context of the psukim. Drash will disengage from the close meaning to pshat, or the rational setting, and it will engage in bringing other ideas, importing ideas in that may or may not have anything to do with the context of the psukim. We're going to see that today, and we're going to see how different, very, very great chachamim, some engage in pshat, some engage in drash. We're going to see how they intersect and what makes them different from each other. So let us begin with Perek Kaf Gimel, chapter 23, verse 10. Kaf Gimel, pasuk Yud. The Torah tells us that you're going to the fact of societal life, that there'll be a time when you're engaged with your enemies. Certainly that has been borne out throughout Jewish history. The Torah tells us, Ki Teitzei machaneh al oivecha. When you take your camp against your enemies, then the Torah says 4 important words. V'nishmarta mikol devara. You shall watch carefully, you shall guard yourself, mikol devara, from any form of bad, misbehavior. The person on the battlefield, it's possible for a man to have a nocturnal emission. That would make him tummy until the sun sets. He is to leave the camp itself. Lo yavo el toch hamachane. Should not conduct himself within the camp until he's become tahor. And then the Torah tells us how that's going to happen. They'll go to the mikveh in the evening, that evening, and when the sun sets, yavo el toch hamachane. So he's not going to be separated or isolated for a long period of time, but when it comes to a Balkari or someone who has a nocturnal emission, that's what he was to do. And then the Torah tells us, V'yad tiyeh lecha michutz lamachaneh, v'yatzata shamachutz. Now, we're going to learn that there are 3 elements that we're going to talk about. We want to talk about pshat. The first is, of course, context. If I'm going to interpret something to be pshat, it has to fit in some way within the context of what the Torah is talking about. That's number 1. Number 2, we try not to play around with the syntax, the relationship of the words to each other in the pasuk. That's second element of pshat. And the third, of course, is it must fit within the context. So the word yud, third one is semantics. Semantics is that words have multiple meanings. Not all words, but many words have multiple meanings. So context, 3 elements are context, syntax, we can't disturb the relationship of the words within the pasuk, and semantics. We have to, if we're going, our interpretation has to fit the context. I'll give you an example. If someone was to ask, what is a hand, to define a hand? Well, generally speaking, we say it's a part of the body used by human beings to grasp things and to use them, whatever it is that they're grasping, to the benefit, usually to the benefit of the individual. That's what a hand does. It's part of the body attached to the arm, and it is used usually to grasp or to build or to engage in some sort of human exercise. Now, if a person were in a theater and someone was playing concert on the piano, on the violin, and when the concert concluded, the master of ceremonies may say, let's give him or her a hand. Well, understandably, what that means there, we expect then to see or hear applause, either appreciation, praise of the act itself. So that's called giving a person a hand. Let's change the context. Context now is that same musician is now going home. He's walking, or she is walking, either one, they're walking to their car, and they trip, and they fall. That person, and there's one of the people in the audience who was there at the time of the concert, sees him fall. He runs up to the person, and the musician says, "Give me a hand." Then you see the person who's standing over him do this. Obviously, even though that's what he did 20 minutes earlier, the context has changed. And because of that, our understanding of the phrase, "give me a hand," and the word hand in and of itself, that changes along with the context. So context dictates pshat. That's an important element in understanding interpretation of the Torah. One is not necessarily less correct or appropriate than the other, because as we're going to see very soon, drash is an extraordinarily important way to understand the Torah, and it helps us in various different ways. But we don't want to confuse pshat and drash. Now, the Torah tells us, so therefore we see the word yad, yelecha, doesn't mean a hand should be, even though hand usually means part of the body. Here, the word yad means place. The word yad in this case, the Torah tells us you have to have a special place set aside. Outside the camp, because you know you're going to need it. And then you're supposed to go out there. Now, this pasuk is the one we're going to focus on. The Torah tells us that yated tiyeh lecha al azeinecha. Yated is like a stick, either a stick or a shovel-like item. Every soldier had to have it. Al azeinecha. Now, the word azeinecha, Rashi tells us it means kamo kli zayin. It means on your weaponry, right? On your weaponry. And so therefore, you have, amongst the weapons you have to have this shovel-like stick, al azeinecha. And notice, azeinecha, if you're reading it without vowels, could read oznecha. We don't know, but it certainly could be. Of course, the Masorah tells us that the word is pronounced azeinecha, on your weapon. And it shall be b'shivtecha chutz, when you need to go out to the camp, the chafartava, you should use that yated to dig, b'shavta v'chisita et ze'atecha, and you shall, so to speak, turn, and then you shall cover your excrement. Okay, you should return and cover your excrement. Why? Because Hashem is there. That's exactly what you want. You want HaKadosh Baruch Hu with you when there's a war. And God is the one who grants us victory. And to subdue your enemies. But that's going to happen when your camp is kadosh, acts and performs in a sacred manner. And And he, God, who is with you, should not be forced to see ervat davar, as anything which is, now oftentimes they translate it as unseen, meaning to say, of course, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, he created us. So the erva is not the problem in its physical sense. It is, though, our deviation from a sacred people who's modest, because it's war, and therefore we can do what we want. And he will turn away from you. Shem will then turn away if you act in an inappropriate behavior. So therefore, we have the expression in English, all is fair in love and war. Judaism rejects both principles, period. What do you mean by fair? What do you mean all is permitted? All is not permitted in love. It isn't. We have an entire Shulchan Aruch about a husband and wife. They conduct themselves at various times during the month, and how young men and women must conduct themselves, even though they believe that they are in love. True, absolutely be true. But all is not fair. All is not permitted in love, and all is not permitted in war. Just because, unfortunately, it is permissible to engage in behavior that we would otherwise not do, to kill someone, is a horrific thing. And oftentimes the one you're killing is only because they have a different uniform, not because they did anything personally to you. So therefore, it's permissible if you're engaged because of self-defense. If you don't kill him, he may well kill you. So therefore, that is a permissible thing, but everything isn't permissible. And so therefore, this is what the Torah tells us. Now, from here, we're going to we learn this principle that every soldier is to have a shovel by which he use to cover the excrement that is naturally going to take place given the passage of time. Now we're going to take a look at the Gemara in Ketubos. The Gemara says as follows: Dorash bar Kapara. Bar Kapara, who was one of the later of the Tanoim, made a drasha. That which is written in the Torah that you have to have a stick which is on azeinecha, he says, Al tikri azeinecha ela oznecha. Don't read the word, don't limit your reading of the word to azeinecha, your armaments, ela al oznecha, your ears. So it's important that we translate it properly too, if we're translating it into English. He is not calling for the amending of the text. He's not calling for a change in the way the Masorah understands this four-letter word, azeinecha. He's saying don't limit your reading. Take a more expansive understanding. Therein lies the drasha. Because, listen to what he says. She'im yishma adam davar she'ino hagun yaniach etzba'o be'ozna. If a person hears something inappropriate which is being said, whether it's lashon hara, whether it's motzi shemra, whether it is vile or inappropriate language, he's supposed to take his finger, which is shaped a little bit like a stick, and to put it into his ear. Therein, of course, the drasha. See why. Hainu Omer Rabbi Lozer, Mepnei Etzbotav Shel Adam, Shupot, why Chadot, Yisedot, why are fingers sort of like shaped like a narrowing at the tip and wider at the base, sort of like a shovel. She'im yishma adam davar she'eino hagun. Somebody hears something inappropriate. This is Bar Kapora's statement, and this is a follow-up on Rabbi Lozer, who preceded. So what have we done? We have taken the concept of Yated and Azenecha, and we've taken them out of the context, which is the battlefield. No one would argue context is not the battlefield, but they've expanded the context to include the daily life. So pshat is a physical item that's to be placed along with armaments, whether it's bows and arrows or spears or whatever they used, or if it's an Uzi, whatever it may be. There must also be means by which people maintain human dignity even in the most undignified of situations. That's what we see here, Barka. Now, and of course, it moves from the very unlikely place where I might be, the battlefield, and it takes us into the daily life. That the battlefield is not necessarily stei hakrav, which is outside of us. Rather, battlefield is the internal battle. He says that a person every day is on a battlefield. We may not know it, but we have to have some means by which that we can battle the Yetzer Hara. Because, let's face it, listening to Lashon Hara is tempting for almost everybody, maybe everybody. And so therefore, it's a battlefield. We have to make the right decisions so that we don't lose our neshama. And that's Bar Kappora's state. Now, the Rambam in Gemara Nevuchim makes, on this Gemara, makes a very powerful statement. He says that but you're going to see that his comments were applicable then, and they are applicable now. He said, there people misunderstand Drash. They don't understand Drash. Drash is a matter of poetic license. It's a metaphor that we are indeed, and very often he calls it Lashon Melitza. It's a metaphor. Not that it would be literal that when I hear something, I do that. And that certainly, and maybe even when I can do it in my house, or I can do it even if I'm on the street and there's something I don't like. But he says there were people who actually believe that Bar Kappora's view is pshat in the pasuk. They take it literally. Because they take it literally, he says, they look foolish. They look foolish. It's not pshat. Pshat has to do with the context. Context is a war. Now we can extend that context. That's right. And the other group is, which he says, that comes out from misunderstanding Bar Kappara, is they look at the group that takes it literally and says that's pshat, and they say, the Bar Kappara didn't know what he was talking about. He's a fool. Both of those are incorrect because they imply a misunderstanding of Rash. Now, I'm going to sort of digress for a moment. A great example, I think, in the literary world of what we would call Drash would be, for example, a book written by George Orwell called Animal Farm. It's about a revolution of the animals on the farm against the master, the owner, who's the farmer. And of course, to have this revolution, you have to have speech. People have to talk. They have to inspire each other to rebel, to join the rebellion. And Orwell's book, of course, was intended to tell everyone, to show in a metaphorical way, by way of excuse me. Orwell's book was intended as an allegory, meaning to say it didn't take place, couldn't take place, but it's instructive to help us understand a concept, and that is totalitarianism, or At that point, we're talking about the Soviet Union and other states that dominated their populations. Totalitarianism is bad. That was the point of the book. But if he just made a statement, totalitarianism is bad, nobody would argue with him, but then again, nobody would remember it either. So let's assume George Orwell came to Chicago. He's not alive anymore, but let's assume he came to Chicago, and he gives a speech about writing novels. In this case, the book Animal Farm. I listened to his speech for 30 minutes, and he asks, "Are there any questions or comments?" I raise my hand, and he says, "Yes." "Well, what you have a comment?" I said, "Yes. I want to tell you that Animal Farm is the most wonderful book that I've ever read, and I learned more from it than I've learned from anything else." So Orwell looks at me and says, "Well, that's nice to hear. What did you learn from Animal Farm?" And I say, "I learned that pigs can actually talk." So Orwell would say to me, if that's what you learned from my book, then you learned less than nothing, because at least before you read the book, you didn't think that pigs talk. So that's what happens when we have midrashim. Midrashim are not intended to teach us literal fact. They're intended to teach us truth that is beyond that. Allegory, the metaphor that they use helps us to understand the truth that they're trying to portray. So the Rambam said, there are people who think that the rabbi, well, how smart could they be? They think pigs talk, or they think that mountains that make decisions to crush, etc., or move, or do the various things that they have them do. And the rabbi says, the Rambam, they never intended that. They intended to teach us a truth. And to do that, you have to have a more sophisticated understanding of what they're trying to say. Okay. So that's the Rambam. Want to mention another thing which we have, and others, by the way, the truth here of Bar Kapora is that perhaps the most sublime aspect of human life and the most tragic aspect of human life is speech. Speech, as the Malbim says to us in Perek Chet of Tehillim, he says, we are not a chai medaber. We are not an animal that speaks. We are a medaber chai. Our essence is that we can speak. Speak doesn't mean to say pass the popcorn. Speech means we are able to conceptualize ideas and with those concepts communicate with other people to do good in the world. So we are a medaber chai. Our essence is being a medaber. And when speech is abused, like Rabbeinu Yonah says, and others say, when speech is abused, then of course, then perhaps we're lower than the animals who are around us. So I'd like to actually conclude now with something that the Kli Yakar said that is very, very instructive. He says, regarding this, actually, regarding this parak that we're learning, he says, first of all, these are not mutually exclusive ideas. As long as we remember that there's an idea behind the idea. The idea in the psukim is real war in a real battlefield, physical and external to the individual, and how we are to conduct ourselves in situations that are stressful, situations where we could sometimes allow ourselves to say, I can do whatever I want. If there's a woman I want, Eshet Yifat Toar, I can take her. I can do whatever I want. It's a war, after all. When we come back to civilization, I'll become civilized. That's, unfortunately, something which is wrong. So, Ad Kedei Kach, the Torah is civilizing us in a time of war, even when it comes to the normal bodily functions that we have. Those have to be watched as well. That's shot. Then there is an equally important element of interpretation, and it is drash. That is Bar Kapara. He takes this idea from the exclusivity of the battlefield, which a relatively small number of people will be engaged, right? Probably most of us, if not all of us, who are listening, I've never been on a battlefield, thank God. And may Hashem Yisborach protect every single chayal and chayalet that is involved in the protection of the Jewish people. But most of us are not involved in that, especially if we're B'nai Golah, we live outside of Eretz Yisrael. So we are not recruited, or certainly we are not drafted into an army situation. But every day we have to make decisions about what we say and what we refrain from saying, what we hear and what we refrain from hearing. That's bar kapara. And so what does he do? He gives a different semantic meaning to the word yated. The finger, he says, that's the yated of daily life. That's what separates the person who's not a Yerei Shamayim from someone who is a Yerei Shamayim. Yerei Shamayim does not mean only to be afraid, to walk around sittering. Yerei Shamayim means, Yira, says the Malbim, means to be aware that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is in the world. And not only is he in the world, he's on every battlefield, both the literal one and the one which we face each and every day. Why? Because the Pasuk says, God is with you. You want to win, you have to believe that God is there. He's aware. Be aware that he's there. To save you, and to subdue your enemies before you. How's that going to happen? When your machaneh, your being, so to speak, both individually and as a society, then that is kadosh, sanctified. It's not that HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He knows all of the equipment that all human beings have. So the issue isn't that, but it is that on the battlefield, people tend to say, I'm here anyway, so all is fair in love and war, as I mentioned earlier. And v'lo yirevecha ervat davar. Ervat davar means that which is unseemly, that which does not belong for a person to do, a Jewish person for sure. Make him, so to speak, metaphorically, leave us. Now we're going to conclude with the words of the Kli Yakar. Such a beautiful statement he makes. Dafka on this pasuk. Okay, he says, after all, words are very powerful. They can lead to wars. Words are powerful. They can lead to hatred and dissension. But he concludes his discussion of this pasuk, and he says, Kederach she'amar chacham echad. He says that we should take into consideration Bar Kapara's statement as one chacham said, Me'olam lo cherfani adam ki im pamach echad. This chacham said that no one ever insulted me more than one time. It's an interesting statement. How does he know that? He says, Perush, says the Kli Yakar, Shelo heshiv m'charfav al midei zeh ishtiko. He never responded to insults, to provocations, to attempts to in some way diminish his dignity. He never responded. And when you don't respond, you silence the aggressor. Shelo chazar legalot avato shenit. He did not, excuse me, he did not allow his dignity to become, or his weakness to once again to be revealed. The more you talk, the more the other person can reveal your weakness. And from that, by doing that, by not responding, he covered up that which his excrement, so to speak, tahainu cherpat kolono, whatever pain he had, doesn't respond. Shenimshal leki, and this cherpa and the pain of insult is considered like ki. So believe that it's considered like excrement. or that which is repulsive to a person. Zehu ikar li zaino shel adam. That is the true weaponry of a person. He b'shtika, through his silence, inatseach, he will prevail. Lo kishi yashiv lo, not by responding. Respond, provoke, and you extend the argument. You're silent, there's nothing the aggressor can do. So therefore, he says, this is the metaphor. Okay? He does not deny the pshat. The pshat is found in the context of the psukim, very, very clear. But the drash, in this case, the drash may have even more application to great numbers of people, because there on the daily battlefield every day, each and every one of us has to decide: respond, don't respond, initiate, don't initiate. And so I hope tonight has helped us clarify the beauty of pshat and the beauty of drash. Good evening to all.